The bullet shattered the whiskey bottle on the fence post 300 yards away, and Zadie Kendrick lowered her rifle while Sheriff Morton fumbled to even get his gun aimed in the right direction. She had ridden into Pinon, New Mexico on a dusty afternoon in late August of 1878, her horse tired and her spirits lower, seeking nothing more than honest work and a place to rest her head without fear of her stepfather's drunken rages finding her. The town itself was little more than a collection of weathered buildings clustered along a single main street, with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising purple and magnificent in the distance. Pinon smelled of horse manure, wood smoke, and the perpetual dust that seemed to coat everything west of the Mississippi. It was perfect for disappearing, which was exactly what Zadie needed. She had expected to find work as a seamstress or perhaps washing dishes at the saloon, but fate had other plans. On her second day in town, she had been walking past the sheriff's office when a commotion erupted. A rattlesnake had spooked someone's horse, and the animal bolted down the main street with a child clinging desperately to the saddle. Without thinking, Zadie had grabbed a rifle from a nearby wagon, tracked the galloping horse and shot the reins clean through, dropping them where the child could grab them and regain control. The crowd had stared at her in stunned silence. Sheriff Morton, a portly man in his 50s with more bluster than skill, had puffed up his chest and declared that no woman could make a shot like that twice. Hence the whiskey bottle, and hence Zadie's second impossible shot in as many minutes. "Well, I'll be damned," muttered a voice behind her, and Zadie turned to see a cowboy leaning against the general store's porch railing, his arms crossed, and his expression somewhere between impressed and amused. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were the color of good whiskey, warm and golden in the afternoon light, and when he smiled at her, something fluttered unexpectedly in her chest. "That was some shooting, miss," he said, pushing off from the railing and walking toward her with an easy, confident stride. He moved like someone comfortable in his own skin, like he belonged to this wild landscape in a way Zadie was only beginning to understand. "Name's Jackson O'Brien." "Folks call me Jack." "Zadie Kendrick," she replied, suddenly very aware of how dusty and travel-worn she must look. She had not bothered with niceties like proper hair arrangements or clean dresses in weeks. Survival had been more important than vanity. "You looking for work, Miss Kendrick?" Jack asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp and assessing. "Because I could use a partner like you." Sheriff Morton huffed indignantly. "Now see here, O'Brien, you cannot just go recruiting every sharpshooter who wanders into town. This is respectable territory, not some outlaw haven." Jack ignored him entirely, his attention fixed on Zadie. "I run a ranch about 10 miles north of here. Lost my foreman last month to the gold fields in Colorado, and I've been trying to manage the spread myself. But we've got rustlers hitting us regular, coyotes after the calves, and more work than one man can handle. I need someone who can shoot, ride, and is not afraid of hard work. Pays fair, and there's a cabin on the property you could have to yourself." Zadie's throat tightened. It sounded too good to be true, which in her experience meant it probably was. "Why would you offer work to someone you just met?" "Because I just watched you make 2 shots that most men could not make with a week's practice," Jack said simply. "And because you did not hesitate when that kid needed help. That tells me something about your character. Besides, I'm desperate. Lost 3 head of cattle just last week, and I cannot keep watch over the whole ranch alone." She wanted to say yes. She wanted it so badly she could taste it, like rain in the desert. But years of her stepfather's cruelty had taught her to be cautious. "What exactly would my duties entail, Mr. O'Brien?" Something flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like respect. During the day, helping me move cattle, mend fences, keep watch for rustlers. Evening meals we would share, as the main house has the only proper kitchen, but you would have your own space otherwise. Nothing improper, Miss Kendrick. I give you my word as a gentleman and a rancher. The crowd that had gathered to watch the shooting demonstration was dispersing now, but Zadie could feel their curious eyes on her. A woman working on a ranch, even in a respectable capacity, would raise eyebrows. But then again, she had been raising eyebrows her whole life simply by refusing to be what others expected. "All right," she said, meeting Jack's gaze squarely. "I will accept your offer, Mr. O'Brien, on a trial basis. 1 month, and if either of us is not satisfied, I walk away with that month's wages and no hard feelings." Jack's smile widened and he extended his hand. "Deal, Miss Kendrick. Can you ride out today, or do you need time to collect your things?" "Everything I own is in my saddlebag," Zadie said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and warm, calloused from hard work, and she found herself noticing the way his thumb brushed across her knuckles before he released her. "I can ride out whenever you are ready." "Then let us get some supplies from the general store and head out," Jack said. "We can make it back to the ranch before sundown if we do not dawdle." As they walked toward the store, Sheriff Morton called after them, "You watch yourself with that one, O'Brien. Women who can shoot like that are usually running from something." Zadie stiffened, but Jack just laughed. "Sheriff, everyone in the territory is running from something. That's what makes it the territory." Inside the general store, Jack loaded up on supplies, flour and coffee and bacon and beans, the staples of ranch life. Zadie tried to pay for her own provisions, but he waved her money away. "You are working for me now. Food comes with the job." The storekeeper, a wizened man named Abernathy, eyed Zadie with undisguised curiosity. "Heard you made quite a show out there, miss. You some kind of sharpshooter from back east?" "Just someone who learned to shoot straight," Zadie said evenly. She did not elaborate, and something in her tone must have discouraged further questions, because Abernathy just nodded and went back to tallying Jack's purchases. They rode out of Pinyon as the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Jack set an easy pace, clearly mindful of the fact that both their horses were carrying heavy loads. For a while, they rode in companionable silence, the only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the rhythmic clip of hooves on hard, packed earth. "So what brings you to New Mexico, Miss Kendrick?" Jack asked eventually, "If you do not mind my asking." Zadie considered how much to tell him. "Needed a fresh start," she said finally. "Things were not good where I came from," he nodded, not pressing for details. "That is reason enough. Half the folks in this territory came here for the same cause." "What about you?" Zadie asked, curious despite herself. "Were you born here?" "Texas, originally," Jack said. "My father had a ranch outside of San Antonio. When he died, my older brother inherited the place. I was 20 years old and had no interest in working someone else's land, even if that someone was family, so I headed north. Found this valley about 5 years ago and fell in love with it. Bought the land with money I had saved up working cattle drives, and I have been building it up ever since." "No family to help?" Zadie asked. "Had a few hands over the years, but most men do not want to work for someone their own age. They drift on, looking for gold or their own land or whatever it is that drives folks west," Jack said. There was no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance. "What about you? Any family back where you came from?" "My mother died when I was 14, Zadie said quietly. "My stepfather was not a kind man. I left as soon as I could scrape together enough money for a train ticket and a horse." Jack was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "I am sorry. No one should have to run from their own home." "It was not a home," Zadie said, "just a place I survived in." They crested a rise, and Jack pulled his horse to a stop, gesturing at the valley spread out before them. "That, Miss Kendrick, is what I call home." The valley was beautiful, a sweep of grassland dotted with cattle, bordered by stands of piñon pine and juniper. A creek glittered silver in the fading light, meandering through the property like a promise. The ranch house itself was modest but well built, constructed of adobe with a covered porch that looked out over the valley. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and Zadie could see a smaller cabin set a respectful distance from the main house. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it. "Come on," Jack said, a note of pride in his voice. "Let me show you around before we lose the light." The cabin he showed her to was simple but clean, with a bed, a small table and chair, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Someone, presumably Jack, had left fresh linens on the bed and a pitcher of water on the table. It was more than Zadie had hoped for, and she had to blink back unexpected tears. "There is a pump by the barn for washing," Jack said from the doorway. "And like I said, you are welcome to take meals in the main house. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage basic provisions." "This is perfect, Mr. O'Brien," Zadie said, turning to face him. "Thank you, Jack," he said. "If we are going to be working together, you might as well call me Jack, and I will call you Zadie if that is all right with you." She nodded, suddenly feeling shy. "That would be fine." "Get yourself settled, then come up to the house when you are ready," Jack said. "I will put together some supper and we can talk about the work schedule." After he left, Zadie sat on the bed and looked around her new home. For the first time in years, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she could belong. Supper that night was simple but filling. Bacon and beans and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Jack was not exaggerating when he said he was not much of a cook, but Zadie had eaten far worse in her life. They sat at the rough wooden table in his kitchen, and he outlined what her work would entail. "We have got about 200 head of cattle scattered across the valley," he said. "Every morning we will need to ride the perimeter, check the fences, make sure none of them have wandered off or been taken. Rustlers usually strike at night, so if we find fresh tracks or missing cattle, we will need to follow them." "You want me to track rustlers?" Zadie asked. "I want us to track rustlers," Jack corrected. "I would not send you out alone, and I would not go alone either. These men are dangerous. But if we can catch them in the act or recover stolen cattle, it is worth the risk. The sheriff is not much help, as you might have noticed." Zadie nodded. "What about other work? You mentioned mending fences." "That too, and there is always something that needs fixing around a ranch. Gates, roofs, harnesses. Can you handle carpentry? I can learn," Zadie said. Jack smiled. "That is all I ask. We will start early tomorrow around dawn. I will knock on your cabin door to wake you if you are not already up." "I am a light sleeper," Zadie said. "I will be awake." As she walked back to her cabin that night, the stars overhead were so thick and bright it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. The air was cooling rapidly, the way it did in the desert, and Zadie wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. In the distance, a coyote howled and another answered. It was a lonely sound, but somehow it felt appropriate. She had been alone for so long that loneliness felt like an old friend. But as she lay in bed that night, staring up at the rough wooden ceiling, she found herself thinking about Jack O'Brien. About the way he had offered her work without hesitation, the way he had defended her to the sheriff, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She barely knew him, she reminded herself. It would be foolish to start feeling anything beyond gratitude. Still, When she finally drifted off to sleep, she was smiling. Dawn came early on the ranch, the sun painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Zadie was already dressed and outside when Jack emerged from the main house, looking faintly surprised to see her waiting by the barn with both horses saddled and ready to go. "You are not lying about being a light sleeper," he said, accepting his horse's reins with a nod of thanks. "Or about being ready to work." "Daylight is wasting," Zadie said, echoing something her mother used to say on the farm where Zadie had grown up, before her stepfather came into their lives and ruined everything. They rode out together as the valley awakened around them. Birds called from the piñon pines, and the cattle were beginning to move, ambling toward the creek for their morning drink. Jack kept up a running commentary as they rode, pointing out landmarks and explaining the layout of his land. "The property runs from that ridge there," he said, pointing north, down to the creek, then west to where those big cottonwoods mark the boundary and east to the road back to town. "It is not the biggest spread in the territory, but it is mine, and I aim to keep it that way." They spent the morning riding the fence line, and Zadie quickly realized that Jack had not been exaggerating about the amount of work that needed doing. Several sections of fence were down, either from age or from cattle pressing against them. They dismounted and spent an hour making repairs, working side by side in the growing heat. Jack was patient when she did not immediately know how to secure a fence post, showing her without making her feel incompetent. "You have got good hands for this work," he observed as she twisted wire tight around a post, "strong and steady." "My mother taught me that anything worth doing is worth doing right," Zadie said, "even if it takes longer." Sounds like she was a wise woman. "She was," Zadie said softly. "I wish you could have met her." They found the first sign of trouble around midday. 3 fence posts had been deliberately cut, and tracks led away from the gap heading northeast, into rougher country. Jack dismounted and studied the tracks, his expression grim. "4 riders, maybe 5, he said. "And they drove off at least a dozen cattle, judging by the tracks. This happened last night, probably around midnight." "Should we follow them?" Zadie asked, her hand instinctively going to her rifle. Jack hesitated, clearly weighing the risks. "We will follow for a bit, see where they are headed. But if they have got too much of a head start, we will have to turn back and report it to the sheriff, useless as he is." They followed the trail for an hour, through increasingly rocky terrain. The rustlers were clearly experienced, taking routes that made tracking difficult. Finally, Jack called a halt at the edge of a narrow canyon. "This is too dangerous," he said. "If they are holed up in there and we ride in blind, we would be sitting targets. We will head back and I will ride into town tomorrow, see if the sheriff will actually do something for once." Zadie wanted to argue, wanted to prove herself, but she also was not foolish enough to ignore Jack's greater experience. "All right," she said. "But if the sheriff will not help, what then?" "Then we set watches at night," Jack said. "Try to catch them in the act next time. It is not ideal, but it is better than losing more cattle." They rode back to the ranch in silence, both frustrated by the theft but pragmatic about their limitations. When they arrived back at the barn, Jack insisted on unsaddling both horses while Zadie went to pump fresh water. "You worked hard today," he said as they walked back toward the buildings. "I am grateful for your help." "It is what you are paying me for," Zadie said, but she could not quite hide her pleased smile. "Still, I appreciate it," Jack said. "A lot of folks would have taken one look at that fence work and decided it was not worth the wages." Over the next few weeks, they fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings were spent riding the property, checking on cattle and mending fences. Afternoons were dedicated to whatever other work needed doing, whether that was repairing the barn roof or chopping wood for winter. Evenings, they shared meals and conversation, and slowly, carefully, Zadie began to let her guard down. She learned that Jack had a dry sense of humor and a genuine love for the land he worked. He learned that Zadie could calculate numbers in her head faster than most people could with paper and pencil, and that she had a surprisingly good singing voice, though she only sang when she thought no one was listening. He learned that she flinched at sudden loud noises and always sat with her back to a wall. She learned that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a longhorn's horn, and that he had once wanted to be a lawyer before his father's death changed his plans. They did not catch the rustlers, though they found evidence of 2 more thefts. Jack made 3 trips into town to report the incidents to Sheriff Morton, who proved to be exactly as useless as everyone predicted. The sheriff suggested that Jack hire more men, as if Jack had not already tried that. He suggested moving the cattle closer to the ranch buildings, which was impossible with a herd that size. He did everything except actually investigate the crimes. That man could not find his own backside with both hands and a map. Jack fumed after the 3rd fruitless trip. I swear he got elected because he was the only one who wanted the job. So what do we do? Zadie asked. They were sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the mountains. It had become a habit, this evening ritual, and Zadie looked forward to it more than she cared to admit. We set a trap, Jack said. Leave some cattle in an area where they have struck before, but we hide and wait. When the rustlers show up, we confront them. That sounds dangerous, Zadie said. It is, Jack admitted, but I cannot keep losing cattle. Another few months of this and I will be ruined. Zadie was quiet for a moment, watching the way the fading light gilded Jack's profile. Somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, she had started to care about this ranch and its owner. The thought of Jack losing everything he had worked for made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with her own situation. All right, she said. When do we set this trap? Jack turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. You do not have to do this, Zadie. It is my ranch, my problem. You said you needed a partner, Zadie reminded him. Partners face trouble together. Something warm flickered in Jack's eyes, and for a moment, Zadie thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he just nodded. Tomorrow night, then, we will set up camp near the north pasture and wait. The next evening, they rode out just after sunset, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies for a cold camp. Jack had selected a position on a ridge overlooking a section of pasture where the rustlers had struck twice before. They could see the cattle grazing below, dark shapes in the gathering twilight, and beyond them the mountains rising like silent sentinels. They could not risk a fire, so they huddled in their bedrolls as the temperature dropped. Jack had insisted that Zadie take the first watch while he got a few hours of sleep, but she found herself too keyed up to feel tired. The night was alive with sounds, the rustling of small animals in the brush, the distant yip of coyotes, the soft lowing of cattle settling down for the night. Around midnight, Jack woke without her having to rouse him, as if his body had some internal clock that knew when his watch was due to start. He moved quietly to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold night air. Anything, he whispered. Nothing yet, Zadie whispered back. It has been quiet. They might not come tonight, Jack said. We might have to do this several nights in a row. Then we will do it several nights in a row, Zadie said simply. Jack was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? All right. Why did you really leave where you came from? I know you said your stepfather was not kind, but there is more to it than that. Is there not? Zadie's first instinct was to deflect, to give him a partial truth and keep her deepest pain hidden. But sitting here in the darkness with Jack's steady presence beside her, she found herself wanting to tell him everything. "He drank," she said quietly. "And when he drank, he got mean. At first it was just words. Then it was a slap here and there. Then it was worse. My mother tried to protect me, but she was not strong enough. When she died, there was no one left to stand between us. So I learned to shoot. Told him if he ever touched me again, I would put a bullet in him. He laughed at first until I shot a coyote that was going after the chickens. After that, he knew I meant it. But I also knew it was only a matter of time before he came at me anyway, so I left." Jack's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers lacing through hers. "I am sorry that happened to you. You deserved better." "We all deserve better than what life gives us," Zadie said, "but we make do with what we have got." "You are not just making do," Jack said, and there was an intensity in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "You are surviving. You are building something new. That takes real courage." Before Zadie could respond, a sound drifted up from the valley below. The soft nicker of a horse quickly hushed. Both of them froze, their hands still clasped, their attention snapping to the pasture. 4 riders were moving through the darkness, barely visible shapes against the slightly lighter sky. They moved with practiced ease, spreading out to surround a section of the herd. As Zadie and Jack watched, the rustlers began cutting out cattle, expertly separating a group of about 10 from the main herd. "Ready," Jack breathed in her ear. Zadie nodded, her free hand moving to her rifle. Jack squeezed her hand once, then released it, and together they mounted their horses as quietly as they could. Jack had planned their approach carefully, positioning them upwind so the rustlers' horses would not catch their scent. They rode down the ridge in silence, not making their presence known until they were close enough that the rustlers could not easily escape. Then Jack raised his voice, strong and clear in the night. "That is far enough, gentlemen. Those are my cattle you are taking." The rustlers spun their horses, and for a moment, everything hung in balance. There were 4 of them and only 2 of Jack and Zadie, but the rustlers could not see that clearly in the darkness. One of the men reached for his gun, and that was when Zadie fired. Her shot hit the ground directly in front of the man's horse, sending the animal rearing and dumping its rider in the dirt. Before the other rustlers could react, she had already chambered another round, the distinctive sound of it carrying clearly in the night air. "The next one goes through whoever is stupid enough to draw," she called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. "Drop your weapons, now." For a long moment no one moved. Then one of the rustlers, a grizzled man with a bandana covering the lower half of his face, slowly raised his hands. All right. No need for anyone to get shot." "Drop your gun first," Jack said, moving forward with his own rifle trained on the group. "Then the rest of you do the same." The guns hit the ground one by one. Jack dismounted, keeping his rifle aimed at the rustlers while Zadie covered him from horseback. Working quickly, he used rope to tie each man's hands behind his back. The one who had been thrown from his horse was cursing steadily, but a look from Zadie silenced him. "You folks are making a big mistake," the grizzled rustler said as Jack secured the last knot. "You do not know who you are messing with." "I know you are stealing my cattle," Jack said evenly. "And that is all I need to know. Zadie, can you gather up their horses?" She did, moving efficiently through the darkness to round up the 4 mounts. The rustlers watched her with expressions ranging from anger to grudging respect. "That is some shooting for a woman," one of them muttered. "That is some shooting for anyone," the grizzled one corrected. "Where did you learn to fire like that, miss?" "None of your concern," Zadie said shortly. They marched the rustlers back to the ranch, a slow process in the darkness. Jack wanted them secured properly before attempting the ride into town. So he locked them in the barn for what remained of the night, with one of them tied to each support post to prevent any escape attempts. I will take first watch, Jack said, settling himself outside the barn door with his rifle across his knees. You get some rest. We will ride into town at first light. I am not tired, Zadie said, and it was true. Her blood was still singing from the confrontation, her mind too alert for sleep. Jack smiled. Then sit with me. Keep me company. So she did, settling down beside him in the pre-dawn darkness. They sat close enough that their shoulders touched, sharing warmth against the chill. Inside the barn, the rustlers had finally stopped their complaining and seemed to have fallen asleep. You were incredible tonight, Jack said quietly. That shot you made, dropping it right in front of that horse. I do not know another person who could have made that shot in the dark. I was terrified, Zadie admitted. I just did not let them see it. That is what courage is, Jack said. Being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. He turned to look at her, and even in the faint starlight, Zadie could see the warmth in his eyes. I meant what I said that first day in town. I need a partner like you. Not just for the ranch work, though you are worth your weight in gold there, but in everything. You are the first person in years who has made me think that maybe I do not want to build this place alone. Zadie's breath caught. Jack, I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything, he said. I just wanted you to know how I feel. I know we have not known each other long, and I know you have got your own troubles to sort through, but I would wait, Zadie. If you needed time, I would wait. She looked at him, this good man who had offered her shelter and work and respect when she had nothing, who had sat up with her on cold nights hunting rustlers, who had taught her how to mend fences and never made her feel less for not knowing, who looked at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting, but also strong enough to stand on her own. I do not need time, she said, and her voice only shook a little. I know how I feel too. I have known for weeks now. I was just too afraid to say anything. Jack's smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and full of light. Yeah, Zadie said, and then Jack was cupping her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs gentle against her cheeks, and he was kissing her. It was nothing like the brutal kisses her stepfather's drunken friends had tried to force on her in the past. This was soft and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wanted. But she did not want to pull away. She wanted to sink into this moment, into the warmth and gentleness and the promise of something better than everything that had come before. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Jack rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face like she was something infinitely precious. I have been wanting to do that for so long, he said. Me too, Zadie whispered. They sat together as the night slowly gave way to dawn, not talking much, just being together. When the sun finally crested the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Jack stood and offered Zadie his hand. Come on, he said. Let us take these rustlers to town and show Sheriff Morton what actual law enforcement looks like. The ride into Pinyon was long but triumphant. The rustlers were sullen and silent, bound and seated on their horses with their hands tied to the saddle horns. Jack and Zadie rode behind them, rifles ready in case anyone tried something foolish, but the fight seemed to have gone out of the thieves. When they arrived in town, a crowd quickly gathered. Sheriff Morton came bustling out of his office, his face turning red when he saw the procession. What in blazes is this? He sputtered. 4 rustlers who have been stealing my cattle for the past 2 months, Jack said calmly. Caught them in the act last night. I figured you might want to lock them up since that is supposedly your job. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Sheriff Morton looked like he wanted to argue, but with so many witnesses, he had little choice but to accept the prisoners. As he was leading them toward the jail, the grizzled rustler turned back to look at Zadie. You ever get tired of ranch work, miss? You could make real money as a sharpshooter, he called. Never seen anyone shoot like that. I am happy where I am, Zadie said firmly, and she saw Jack smile. They spent the rest of the day in town, giving statements about the rustling and stocking up on supplies. Everywhere they went, people wanted to hear the story of how Zadie had shot the gun from a rustler's hand in the dark. By the time they rode back to the ranch that evening, the tale had grown to near mythical proportions. In another week, they will be saying you shot the hats off all 4 rustlers while blindfolded, Jack said, laughing. Let them talk, Zadie said, as long as we know the truth. And what is the truth? Jack asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. The truth is that we did it together, Zadie said. Like partners, Jack agreed and reached over to take her hand as they rode. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Zadie's life. With the rustlers caught and jailed, the ranch settled into a peaceful routine. The work was still hard, the days still long, but there was joy in it now. Joy in working beside Jack, in sharing meals and conversation and stolen kisses when the work was done. Jack courted her properly, despite the fact that they were living on the same property. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow and insisted on helping with dishes after supper. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions and listened when she suggested improvements. He made her feel valued in a way she had never experienced before. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Jack cleared his throat nervously. I have been thinking, he said. Your trial month ended weeks ago, and you never said anything about leaving. I have no intention of leaving, Zadie said, confused. Unless you want me to. No, God, no, Jack said quickly. That is not what I mean at all. What I mean is, I think we should make this arrangement more permanent, official. Zadie's heart began to race. What are you saying, Jack? He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. I am saying that I love you, Zadie Kendrick. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you shoot that whiskey bottle. I know we have not known each other that long, and I know you have been hurt before. But I promise you, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes. Yes to what? Zadie asked, though she already knew. Jack smiled. Marry me, Zadie. Be my partner in every sense of the word. Help me build this ranch into something we can be proud of. Have a family with me, grow old with me. Say you will. Zadie felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but they were good tears, happy tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you, Jack O'Brien. Jack let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around on the porch until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Zadie thought that she had never imagined happiness could feel like this, so bright and overwhelming it was almost painful. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Pinyon. It was a simple ceremony, attended by most of the town. Zadie wore a dress that the ladies of the church had helped her sew, pale blue calico with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Jack wore his best suit, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, his expression was so full of love and wonder that Zadie nearly started crying all over again. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the ranch. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else brought a guitar, and they danced in the barn as the sun set and the stars came out. Zadie, who had never danced before, let Jack teach her the steps, laughing as she stumbled over her own feet. You are a better shot than you are a dancer, Jack teased. Good thing you married me for my shooting skills then, Zadie shot back, and Jack laughed and pulled her closer. I married you for 100 reasons, he said. Your shooting skills are just one of them. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. They had a hard winter, with snow that came early and stayed late. 2 calves were lost to wolves, and a section of the barn roof collapsed under the weight of ice. But they faced it all together, and somehow that made even the hardest days bearable. In the spring, Zadie discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling poorly for weeks, tired and queasy, before she finally worked up the courage to ride into town and see the doctor. When he confirmed her suspicions, she rode home in a daze, her hand pressed protectively over her still flat stomach. Jack was mending a gate when she arrived back at the ranch. He looked up and immediately knew something was different. "What is it?" he asked, dropping his tools and coming to help her dismount. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," Zadie said, and she was smiling even though tears were streaming down her face. "Jack, we are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her. Then he let out a shout of pure joy and picked her up, spinning her around just like he had the night he proposed. "Careful," Zadie said, laughing. "You will make me dizzy." "I do not care," Jack said, but he set her down gently anyway, his hands moving to rest on her stomach. "We are going to have a baby. A real family." "We are already a real family," Zadie said, covering his hands with hers. "But yes, now we will be 3. Their son was born in December of 1879, during a cold snap that had Jack pacing the floor of the main house, while the midwife from town attended to Zadie in the bedroom. When he finally heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn, he nearly broke down the door in his haste to get inside. Zadie was exhausted and pale, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but she had never looked more beautiful to Jack. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced baby boy with a shock of dark hair. "Meet your son," she said tiredly. "James Patrick O'Brien." "James," Jack repeated, kneeling beside the bed and gently touching the baby's impossibly small hand. James immediately wrapped his fist around Jack's finger, and Jack felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Zadie. Thank you for this." "We made him together," Zadie said, smiling. "Partners, remember." Life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. James was a good baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss, though he had inherited his mother's lung capacity and could certainly make his displeasure known when he was hungry or wet. Jack was a devoted father, getting up with Zadie for night feedings and walking the floor with James when he was colicky. The ranch continued to thrive. Word had spread about Zadie's shooting skills and how they had caught the rustlers, and no one dared try to steal from the O'Brien ranch again. They were able to hire 2 hands to help with the work, good men who were respectful of Zadie and willing to take orders from a woman when Jack was not available. When James was 2, Zadie became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect and was less nervous, though Jack fretted over her constantly. Their daughter was born in the summer of 1882, a tiny, delicate girl with Zadie's features and Jack's golden eyes. "Elizabeth Rose," Zadie said, cradling her daughter close. "Rosie for short." Jack, holding a squirming James who desperately wanted to see his baby sister, smiled. "Elizabeth Rose O'Brien. It is a good name, a strong name." Rosie proved to be more challenging than James had been. She was fussy and particular, wanting to be held constantly and refusing to sleep unless someone was rocking her. But she was also impossibly sweet, with a smile that could melt the hardest heart, and both her parents were completely wrapped around her tiny finger within days. As the children grew, the ranch grew with them. Jack and Zadie expanded the herd, bought more land, and built a larger house with enough bedrooms for their growing family. They added a proper schoolroom where Zadie taught the children to read and write and do mathematics. Jack taught them about ranching, and Zadie, to Jack's amusement and pride, taught them both to shoot. "She is only 6, Jack protested when Zadie first started teaching Rosie to handle a rifle. "I was younger than that when my mother taught me," Zadie said. "Besides, we live on a ranch." They need to know how to protect themselves. By the time James was 10 and Rosie was 8, they were both excellent shots, though neither could match their mother's near supernatural accuracy. The story of how Zadie could shoot straighter than the sheriff had become local legend, and people sometimes traveled from other towns just to see if the tales were true. Zadie always obliged, setting up increasingly difficult targets and hitting them with casual ease. She never charged for these demonstrations, but Jack noticed that their reputation brought in plenty of business. Ranchers from across the territory sought Jack's advice on dealing with rustlers, and more than one asked if they could hire Zadie as a guard. "She is my wife, not a gun for hire," Jack always said, but he said it with pride. In the summer of 1888, when Zadie was pregnant with their third child, trouble came calling in the form of her stepfather. Zadie was in the garden behind the house, picking vegetables for supper, when she heard a voice she had hoped never to hear again. Well, look at you. Got yourself a nice little setup here." She straightened slowly, her hand instinctively moving to the revolver she always wore at her hip these days. Her stepfather looked older and meaner, his face red from drink and sun exposure, his clothes ragged. "Get off my property," Zadie said, her voice cold and hard. "That is no way to greet family," he said, swaying slightly. He was drunk, she realized. "Thought maybe you might spare some money for your old pa, for old time's sake." "You are not my father," Zadie said, "and you are not welcome here. Leave now or I will make you leave." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You always were a mouthy girl. Thought maybe you had learned some respect by now." "I learned plenty," Zadie said. "I learned that I do not have to take abuse from anyone. I learned that I am stronger than you ever gave me credit for. And I learned that some people are not worth the air they breathe." His face darkened with anger, and he took a step toward her. "You need to remember who you are talking to." "I know exactly who I am talking to," Zadie said, and her hand moved to rest on her gun. "A coward who beat women and drank away every cent his family ever earned. A man who is not fit to speak my mother's name. Now get off my land before I shoot you for trespassing." "You would not dare," he said, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. "Try me," Zadie said flatly. He must have seen something in her expression that convinced him she meant every word, because he backed away, holding up his hands in a mockery of surrender. Fine. I can see I am not wanted here, but do not think this is over, girl. Blood is blood." "The only blood we share is my mother's," Zadie said. "And you killed her as surely as if you had put a gun to her head. Now get out of my sight." He left, stumbling back toward the road, and Zadie stood watching until he was out of sight. Only then did she allow herself to shake, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. She was still standing there when Jack came around the corner of the house, James and Rosie trailing behind him. "Zadie, what is wrong?" Jack asked, immediately at her side. "You are white as a sheet." "My stepfather was here," Zadie said. "He wanted money. I sent him away." Jack's expression darkened. "Did he hurt you? Did he threaten you?" "No, he just wanted money," Zadie said, though her hands were still shaking. "But Jack, I am afraid he will come back." "Then we will be ready," Jack said grimly. He turned to James. "Son, I need you to ride into town and fetch the sheriff. Tell him we have had a trespasser and we want it on record. Rosie, you stay with your mother." Over the next few days, they increased security around the ranch. Jack made sure someone was always within earshot of the house, and Zadie kept her rifle close at all times. But her stepfather did not return, and after a week, they began to relax. Then one night, Zadie woke to the smell of smoke. She was up and moving before she was fully awake, shaking Jack urgently. "Fire," she said. "I smell smoke." They both ran outside to find the barn ablaze, flames shooting high into the night sky. Jack immediately started shouting for the ranch hands while Zadie ran to wake the children. Working together, they formed a bucket brigade from the pump to the barn, but the fire had too much of a head start. All they could do was keep it from spreading to the other buildings and watch as the barn burned to the ground. In the morning, as they stood looking at the smoking ruins, they found evidence that the fire had been deliberately set. Boot prints in the ash, the smell of kerosene, and a crude message scratched into the dirt. "Should have given me the money." "He tried to burn us out," Zadie said, her voice shaking with fury. "He could have killed us all." "We are going to the sheriff right now," Jack said. "And this time, Morton will actually do his job, or I will go over his head to the territorial marshal." Sheriff Morton, faced with evidence of arson and attempted murder, finally roused himself to action. A manhunt was organized, and Zadie's stepfather was found 3 days later in a saloon in Santa Fe, drunk and bragging about teaching his uppity stepdaughter a lesson. He was arrested and eventually sentenced to 10 years in prison for arson. The day they received word of his sentencing, Zadie cried for the first time since the fire. Jack held her as she sobbed out years of fear and pain and anger, and when she was finally done, she felt lighter than she had in years. "It is over," she said, wiping her eyes. "It is finally over." "It is over," Jack agreed, "and we will rebuild. The barn, everything. We will make it better than before." They did rebuild, and by the time their third child was born that winter, a healthy baby boy they named Thomas, the new barn was standing tall and sturdy. Life returned to normal, or as normal as life on a ranch could be. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. James grew into a serious, responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rosie was clever and spirited, equally at home in the schoolroom or on horseback. Thomas was the baby of the family, cheerful and easygoing, the one who could always make everyone laugh. In 1895, when James turned 16, he asked if he could start taking on more responsibility around the ranch. Jack, bursting with pride, agreed. Father and son worked side by side, and Jack began teaching James everything he would need to know to eventually take over the ranch. "He is a good man," Zadie said one evening, watching James work with one of the horses. "You have raised him well." "We have raised him well," Jack corrected. "You have taught all our children to be strong and independent and kind. That is all from you." Zadie leaned against her husband, comfortable and content. They were in their late 30s now, showing the wear of years of hard work and the southwestern sun, but Jack still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Marrying a woman who was running from her past?" "Never," Jack said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children, this life we have built together. I would not change a single thing." In 1898, Rosie announced that she wanted to become a teacher. She was 15, smart as a whip, and determined to make a difference in the world. Jack wanted her to stay close to home, but Zadie understood her daughter's need to forge her own path. "Let her go to the teaching college in Santa Fe," Zadie said. "She can come home for visits and she needs to spread her wings." Jack grumbled but ultimately agreed, and that fall they sent Rosie off to school. The house felt empty without her bright presence, but they were proud of her ambition. Thomas, at 13, announced that he did not want to be a rancher at all. He wanted to be a veterinarian, having developed a love for animals that went beyond simple husbandry. "A veterinarian," Jack repeated, trying to wrap his head around this development. "That requires years of schooling." "I know," Thomas said, "but it is what I want to do. Is that all right?" Jack looked at Zadie, who smiled and nodded. "It is more than all right," Jack said. "We will support you in whatever you choose to do. though I admit I will miss having you around the ranch. I will always come back, Thomas promised. This is home. The turn of the century found the O'Brien family prosperous and happy. James had married a girl from town, a sensible young woman named Sarah who fit into the ranch family as if she had always been there. They were expecting their first child, making Jack and Zadie grandparents for the first time. Rosie had graduated from teaching college and taken a position at the school in Pinyon, where she was beloved by her students and respected by their parents. She had also caught the eye of the new doctor in town, a young man named Samuel Hayes, and Zadie suspected a wedding would not be far behind. Thomas was studying at a veterinary college in Colorado, coming home every summer to practice his skills on the ranch animals. He was brilliant and dedicated, and they were immensely proud of him. As for Jack and Zadie, they were growing old together just as Jack had promised all those years ago. They still worked the ranch, though they left more of the heavy labor to James and the hired hands these days. They still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sunset and talking about their day. And they still loved each other with the same fierce devotion they had felt from the beginning. "Do you remember that first day in town?" Zadie asked one evening. They were sitting close together, Jack's arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest. "When you said you needed a partner like me." "Of course I remember," Jack said. "Best decision I ever made, asking you to work for me." "You took a chance on me," Zadie said. "A strange woman who was clearly running from something." "I saw something in you that day," Jack said. "Strength and courage and determination. I knew you were special. I just did not know how special until I got to know you." "I was so afraid," Zadie admitted. "Afraid to hope that life could be good, afraid to believe that I could be happy." "And now?" Jack asked. "Now I know that happiness is not just possible, it is real," Zadie said. "I have spent over 20 years being happier than I ever dreamed I could be. And it is all because a cowboy in a dusty New Mexico town decided to take a chance on a woman who could shoot straight." Jack laughed. "Well, you did shoot straighter than the sheriff. Still do, for that matter." "Sheriff Morton retired last year," Zadie said. "They elected James Carter to replace him. Thank goodness. At least he is actually competent." "Speaking of shooting," Jack said, "some folks from Albuquerque were asking if you might be willing to do a demonstration at the territorial fair this fall." "They are willing to pay." Zadie considered it. She was 50 years old now, and while her eyesight was still sharp and her hands still steady, she was not sure she wanted to be a spectacle. On the other hand, the money would be useful and it might be fun. "I will think about it," she said. "Though I would want you there with me." "Always," Jack promised. "I am always there with you." In September of 1903, Zadie stood in front of a crowd at the territorial fair and proceeded to hit every target they put in front of her. She shot playing cards edge on at 20 paces, broke bottles thrown in the air, and hit a silver dollar tossed up by Jack from 50 yards away. The crowd went wild, and afterward, a reporter from the Albuquerque newspaper interviewed her. "What is the secret to your shooting ability, Mrs. O'Brien?" the reporter asked. Zadie thought about it. "Practice," she said, "and good motivation. When I was learning to shoot, my life depended on it. That focuses the mind wonderfully." "And what advice would you give to young women who want to learn to shoot?" "That it is a valuable skill, whether you are protecting yourself, hunting for food, or protecting your property," Zadie said. "Do not let anyone tell you that shooting is not for women. If you can hold a rifle, you can learn to fire it accurately." The article ran in newspapers across the territory, and for a few weeks, Zadie was something of a celebrity. She found it more amusing than anything, and she was relieved when the attention died down and she could go back to her quiet life on the ranch. Rosie married Dr. Samuel Hayes in the spring of 1904, and Zadie cried happy tears as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle. Rosie looked beautiful in her wedding dress, radiant with joy, and Zadie remembered her own wedding day and how scared and hopeful she had been. "She is going to be happy," Jack said, taking Zadie's hand. "Samuel is a good man." "I know," Zadie said, "but she is still my baby girl." "She will always be your baby girl," Jack said, "no matter how old she gets." James and Sarah's second child was born that summer, a daughter they named Zadie in honor of her grandmother. When they brought the baby to the ranch to introduce her, Zadie held the tiny infant and felt her heart swell with love. "She is perfect," Zadie said, tears streaming down her face. "Absolutely perfect. Just like her grandmother," James said, and Zadie laughed through her tears. Thomas graduated from veterinary college in 1905 and returned to New Mexico, opening a practice in Pinon. He lived in town but visited the ranch several times a week, treating the animals and sharing meals with his parents. He had no interest in marriage yet, claiming he was too busy establishing his practice. But Zadie suspected he was just waiting for the right person. As the years passed, Jack and Zadie gradually turned more and more of the ranch operation over to James. They were in their 60s now, and while they were still healthy and active, they were ready to enjoy a slower pace of life. They traveled to Denver to visit Thomas when he attended a veterinary conference there. They took a trip to San Francisco to see the ocean, something neither of them had ever done before. But they always came back to the ranch, to the valley that had been their home for over 30 years. This was where they belonged, where their roots ran deep, where their history was written in every fence post and building. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, and there was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Jack and Zadie danced together under the stars, just like they had at their wedding, and Zadie thought about how far they had come. 30 years, she said wonderingly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever." "The best 30 years of my life," Jack said, "and I am looking forward to 30 more. They did not get quite 30 more years, but they got close." Jack died in the winter of 1936, at the age of 78, in his sleep with Zadie beside him. He had lived a good, long life, and he left behind a thriving ranch, 3 successful children, 7 grandchildren, and a wife who loved him more than words could express. Zadie mourned him deeply, but she also celebrated the life they had built together. She lived another 5 years, dividing her time between the ranch and her children's homes. She got to meet her first great-grandchild, a boy named Jack in honor of his great-grandfather. She taught her grandchildren to shoot, passing on the skills that had saved her life all those years ago. And she told stories about the Old West, about the days when Pinon was just a dusty frontier town, and a woman who could shoot straight was a rarity. On a warm evening in May of 1941, Zadie sat on the porch of the ranch house, surrounded by her family. James and Sarah were there with their children and grandchildren. Rosie and Samuel had come from town with their family. Thomas, who had never married but had lived a full and satisfying life, sat beside his mother holding her hand. "Tell us again about how you met Papa," one of the grandchildren asked. So Zadie told the story one more time. About shooting a whiskey bottle to impress a sheriff, about a cowboy who had said he needed a partner like her, about falling in love on a ranch in New Mexico and building a life together against all odds. "And we lived happily ever after," she finished, smiling at her family. "The end?" the grandchild asked. "Not the end," Zadie said. "Just the beginning of a new chapter. Love never really ends, you see. It just changes and grows and becomes part of the people we leave behind." That night, Zadie died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82. She was buried beside Jack on a hillside overlooking the valley, with a simple headstone that read, Zadie Kendrick O'Brien, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She could shoot straighter than anyone. The ranch stayed in the O'Brien family for generations, passed down from James to his children and grandchildren. The story of Zadie and Jack became family legend, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But for those who had known them, who had seen the way they looked at each other after 30 years of marriage with the same love and devotion they had shown at the beginning, the story was simply truth. Two people who had found each other in the Wild West, who had built a life together through hard work and determination and love. A cowboy who had recognized strength and courage when he saw it, and a woman who had finally found a place where she could be herself without fear. They had been partners in every sense of the word, in work and in life and in love. And their love story endured, passed down through the generations, a testament to the power of taking chances, of seeing the best in people, and of believing that happiness is possible even in the hardest of times. The ranch still stands today, more than a century after Jack O'Brien first offered Zadie Kendrick a job and changed both their lives forever. The valley is still beautiful, the mountains still rise purple and magnificent in the distance, and if you listen carefully on a quiet evening, you might almost hear the echo of laughter and music, of two people who loved each other and built something that lasted long after they were gone. Their story was simple in the end. A cowboy said he needed a partner, and a woman who could shoot straighter than the sheriff said yes. And from that simple beginning came a love that spanned decades, a family that thrived, and a legacy that endured. It was not always easy, and there were challenges and heartaches along the way, but they faced everything together, side by side, partners to the end. And if that is not a happily ever after, then what is?